So thermoplastics. First, we're going to talk about how to deal with them safely, and how to build with thermoplastics for primarily cosplay. This is mostly kind of my entry-level class where we learn about materials and applications for them, as well as if you don't know the wide world of thermoplastics, this is kind of your like 101. This is kind of the jumping off point for you. So who am I? My name is Ichigo, or Cat. I go by the Nalmer Strawberry Paper Doll online for most things. My history is as a fashion designer, with a focus on alternative and kawaii fashions, or Harajuku fashions, which are very popular based in the practice of alternative fashions from Akiba and Japanese alternative culture. So that is who I am. I have been sewing since I was 3 years old, and I have been cosplaying since I was about 7 or 8. So it's been a fun, long journey. I am circling the world for my 31st year this year. So yeah, it's been a fun ride. So the first person I want to introduce you to is Respirator Senpai. Now, Respirator Senpai is going to be your very best friend on your journey through your thermoplastics adventures, because he is all about safety. And Respirator Senpai here is to remind you that when you are working with malleable materials that are inorganic or organic, you want to make sure you have the proper respirator on. Now, this isn't just a cloth mask. This isn't just an N95. While those are both great masks, you want to make sure you have the proper respirator and filters. You can see the lovely little kind of chubby cheeks Respirator Senpai has on him. He has filters specifically for working with inorganic materials. Now, this helps filter it out and protect my lungs, because you only have one set of lungs, and as we are dealing with right now, it is a very unsafe world out there for them. So I want you to be able to take care of yourself as much as possible so that you can go on and build beautiful projects. So this is, again, one of my big things that I do focus on, which is safety. That is a big practice that I always focus on. So I always like to give a warning to folks about proceeding with caution and always wearing a respirator. So foam itself is a temperamental, foam, thermoplastics, everything like that are temperamental and give off chemical fumes under certain circumstances. So when you're working in foam, you want to work in a well-ventilated and lit area with a mask to protect your lungs from the fumes. When you are working with base foam, which is kind of where we all build from when we're first getting into thermoplastics, thermoplastics is a bit of an investment. It's a bit of a budget killer there sometimes with a lot of them, because they can be quite expensive. A lot of us start in a place where you use foam, you use yoga mats, you use there are so many places to get these kind of foams, and a lot of it is just your base. So when you have your base foam, it's unfinished, and it's more susceptible to being punctured, damaged, squished, and marred, and it has texture. So when you're painting it and trying to get a nice kind of smooth coat or a metal finish, sometimes it's a little harder to work with. Treatments you can do to it, though, that it takes to very well versus thermoplastics are things like cutting, sanding, and shaping it with heat or physical force. Now, thermoplastics can take to those characteristics as well, but foam has certain characteristics, like how it has a thickness to it. It has a little bit of stiffness to it when it is heated. So even if it's heated, it's not going to melt into your hands and get really soft. So it's a little bit easier to work with. So your basic supplies and tools when you're first starting are going to be things like your scissors. Now, your basics are going to be, these are going to be items I suspect that most of us have around our local abode. These are mostly going to be your entry level, I'm just getting into it and I want to learn more, but I don't really have the funds to do it. Maybe you're a college kid and you're just working in your dorm, or you're a high school kid and you're wanting to get into cosplay, but you're not quite sure how. A lot of these things, I'm going to recommend that if you are working with sharp objects or dangerous objects, that you have someone to help you or guide you or just keep you safe. Have a cosplay buddy, It's always fun to work in a project as long as you're within a pod or you're practicing proper social distancing, but use those common sense when you're dealing with our new world. So MSDS, in chat, does anybody know what an MSDS is, or I believe it's called MSD now, or it's got a little bit of a shorter acronym. Oh my gosh, yay! Brazilian mafioso. Thank you, Ariel. Yes, it is a material safety data sheet, and it is safety data sheet now. Scientists got this. Heck yes, thank you, my lovely, lovely science brains. You guys are so awesome. So, a material safety data sheet, or a safety data sheet, is kind of the encyclopedic knowledge of whatever the material you are working with is. Now, this includes the chemical makeup, how to handle the material, even how to dispose of the material so you're not just dumping it back into the environment. And with a lot of thermoplastics, there's actually a no or low waste option because you can stick it back together in what we like to call Worbla pie, but it is not edible. I do not recommend. 10 out of 10 does not recommend. Binging with Babish would give it a thumbs down on the consumption. So, when it comes to working with materials that you're not sure how to work with, or you're worried about it, it's always good to look up the material safety data sheets. And a lot of these are actually filed online. So if you know the actual name for the product you're working with, Worbla in particular has a lot of different styles. You can look these up and have them kind of in your binder. And this is just kind of a way to be more professional when you're handling materials. Again, so these budget supplies or basic supplies are kind of what you can find around your house, usually if you're a student or you're just kind of working on your first few costumes. Usually scissors, an X-Acto blade, or a box cutter. You can get nice, clean finishes with these. It just takes a lot of practice. One thing I always tell my students is to never measure yourself by others, because everybody's on a different trek. Everybody's running a race, but it's the same race, but we're all at different levels. So never judge yourself by someone else's progress. Always take the time to practice and get better and celebrate your goals. So a hot glue gun is a good place also to start when you're dealing with glues, because a lot of us have them from crafting and holiday time. Contact cement is a good one as well and is very budget friendly. You can find a lot of companies that sell a contact cement in a budget friendly price point. Sorry, my Google overlord decided that I was speaking to them. So yeah, so you can get a lot of these materials inexpensively. Now, E6000. Who knows what E6000 is or about it in the chat? Do you guys know my safety warning about it? Does anybody know? I'm sure my scientists got this. I'm sure. Oh, all right. She coming back with an answer. Oh no, you don't know. That's okay. I feel good that the fashion designer has a one-up on the scientist now. Okay. I mean, it's kind of sad that it's a one-up, but E6000 has fat-soluble fumes. So when you're working in it with a long term and you're not wearing your respirator, senpai, then of course what's going to happen is those fumes are actually going to get into your fat cells. And then if you decide that you want to be a big buff Cheeto puff and you decide to work out, you can actually get a kind of terminal reaction to it, because as you dissolve your fat, you can get kind of sick and it can cause chronic illness. So it is one of those things. You'll see a lot of it with people who do a lot of rhinestone work or gem work, adhesive work to gowns and other projects like that. If you're not wearing a respirator properly, then it can make you very sick. So it is a glue that is really great and super awesome. It's rubber based, petroleum based, so you do want to be careful with it. Yeah, so it is a good budget glue, but be safe with it. A hair dryer is also one of those tools, one of those very, it's a tool that I traditionally do not recommend. Now, it is a good, sort of basic, I say it with a stipulation. The stipulation being that hair dryers were not built for running for long periods of time. And what I mean by long periods of time is, as you'll see in the advanced bracket, you'll see that there's a heat gun. A heat gun is built for construction work. Heat guns were actually primarily made for pretty much getting popcorn ceilings off of popcorn ceilings. So they were made to be resilient and construction and industrial grade, whereas hair dryers they're give or take. I've had people go, oh my gosh, I use my hair dryer all the time. It works perfectly fine for me in armor building, blah, blah, blah. But then I've had other people go, it overheated. My hair started sparking. And I'm like, safety first, guys. So if you find that you use your hair dryer and it is working fine for you under surveillance, you make sure you have an eye on it at all times. And if you see anything questionable, you make sure that you've unplugged it, you've blah, blah, blah. You know, operate with caution, severe caution. Basic forms and weighted clips. So these are just things like bowls or other stuff like that that are not temperature sensitive. You don't want to work with anything temperature sensitive or anything that's going to pop on you or break on you, or you're not looking to make whoever owns those bowls upset. I traditionally like to use my metal bowls. Now, this is with the stipulation that I am not touching the metal bowls with my hands while I am handling the thermoplastics. But basic forms or weighted clips are very, very helpful. They act as basically secondary hands. Sandpaper is a nice basic way to get a clean finish on stuff and get a smooth finish on things without having to buy a Dremel. Dremels can be, I'd say lower end Dremels can be anywhere between like 20 to 40, but I don't usually recommend them. I usually recommend that you just save up and spend the $80 to $100 so you can get all the attachments, you can get all the proper kinds of Dremels, and I don't usually recommend the wireless because they tend to burn out much more quickly. But they can be an investment. So sandpaper it's going to take elbow grease. It's going to take a little bit of elbow work, but it's time sweat versus money sweat, you know? Then, of course, primers and sealers. So who here in the chat, lovelies, has heard of wood glue as a sealer for armor, for foam, for thermoplastics, anything like that? All right, so we've got Crystal Heart and Brazilian Mafioso is typing, but yes, so y'all are in a battle. So what it is that wood glue is a great way to start as a budget-friendly way to finish your costumes. Now, the only problem is that it is water soluble. It's water soluble, so uh, Brazilian Mafiosa says, hairspray? Yes, in wig applications, it would actually be very good for that because a lot of the wood glues do dry clear or dry pretty friendly for wigs, and you can wash them out. But the downside is if you take your armor into a water feature, perhaps a fountain, a pool, it is not going to hold up to that. Now, I traditionally recommend Mod Podge. It is slightly higher, like cents on the dollar, to be honest, but they do have water resistant or waterproof style finishes. They do also have water-based ones that can be degraded with water, but it is going to be much more hardy because they do have like acrylamides or acrylic in them that help them to be a little bit more water resistant than wood glue. However, wood glue does beat it out on the price point. So if that's your be all end all, then of course you can start out with wood glue. Perfectly acceptable, but I usually recommend Mod Podge. Mod Podge also comes in a variety of finishes as well because it's got matte, it's got satin, it's got shiny, super shiny, PVC shiny, blah, blah, blah. It's all that fun stuff. Paints and applicators. So puffy paint, acrylic, and sponges. These are just kind of your run-of-the-mill. You're going to Walmart, you're going to Target, whatever, and you're going through the school supplies area, the crafts area. These are things you can just kind of pick up and throw in your cart like a supermarket sweep, and you can build some armor from them. I like puffy paint for the application that it can give a 3D effect in armor. Maybe you're doing some divots, maybe you're doing some built-up filigree work, or maybe even embroidering over it. It can create a trapunto look. It can create I know that's your keyword of the day, kids, trapunto. And it can create a nice raised texture without having a lot of finishing needed because puff paint is a naturally leveling paint, which means that it smooths itself out over time. Acrylic is a great place to start. If you're having issues with cracking and stuff like that, I also recommend gel medium and sponges, makeup sponges, sponge brushes, things like that. That is usually what I recommend. Now, if you're looking to get a pressed metal, a brushed metal, a brassy kind of finish to it, or do dry brushing, heck yes, you can go and get those cheap brushes. But I usually recommend sponges to give you a nice finished look without the brush texture. So, advanced. Do we have any questions on basics before I move on? But yes, as we have in chat, wood glue is multi-purpose. It does have quite a few applications, and a lot of these materials, even though they are an investment, they can help you throughout your portfolio of looks, as it were. They can help you out in many different applications and not just for the one project. That's why you see a lot of builders, Mythbusters and them, they have large supplies of these things, and it is a dragon's hoard. I will not lie. Too many hobbies, I have them. I have them all. And my house is too small. So advanced. We're going to go into advanced stuff since we don't have any questions in the chat. Sharp and pointy things. So again, use with caution. If you're a young minor, use them with parental or partner support. And make sure that you're setting up your space so that you're not going to be damaging anything. A hot knife is a great tool. However, it can be quite dangerous because it does heat up, but it's basically an X-Acto blade and an iron had a baby. So what it does is it gives you a nice clean edge on, it can be used on fabric, it can be used on foam, it can be used on thermoplastics to a point, and it just heats the knife up so it cuts through certain things, kind of like butter. However, it does release some of those chemical fumes. So again, work in a well-ventilated area with your respirator on, all that fun stuff. A Dremel tool with attachments, I talked about them a little bit earlier. They can range anywhere from $20 to $100+. I don't usually recommend going low end since this is going to be a tool that's going to be used for your future builds and things like that. I usually recommend going with the wired, and kind of if you want to go entry-level Dremel and get a few attachments for it. The wired ones do have a gooseneck attachment if you're having problems with it not being quite as portable as wireless. But I've had so many friends who have had the wireless Dremels that have burned them out and had to purchase multiples of them because they burn out so quickly. A soldering iron is a burning tool. It's like the hot knife. It is just used in different applications. It can be used very similarly, and it just retains its point as opposed to a hot knife, which would require blade changes every other project and things like that. However, there are some applications that the hot knife is better than the soldering iron. A heat gun, again, is a construction tool, so it is industrial grade. A lot of them are made for either 3 temperatures, 2 temperatures, or multi-temp. I have one, I believe, that goes 5 temperature, and that is because different thermoplastics require different temperatures. I think mine is a Black & Decker from Home Depot that I paid, I want to say $30 for, and that's inexpensive for a tool that's going to last me for a long time. It came with a few different tips for the nose of it. One is for getting popcorn sealing off the popcorn ceiling, as it were, and a few others that help focus the heat stream, so I have less of a chance of burning myself or other stuff. I would recommend if you start to work with a heat gun that you make sure you're practicing proper safety protocol with it, because they can get very hot and they can be quite dangerous in certain situations. So make sure you get yourself a holder, you're working in a good workspace, and then you can kind of go from there. So, sealers and sealants. I know a lot of you have probably heard of Plasti Dip and Flexi Dip. Or maybe you haven't heard of Flexi Dip, but I know you've heard of Plasti Dip, and I'm sure some of you have heard frog juice, and I'm sure many others that you guys could rattle off to me on command. All right, yay, we're learning in the chat today. So Plasti Dip is an aerosol. It is basically Flexi Dip, but aerosolated. So they're basically the same product, but marketed differently. So Flexi Dip is just a plastic acrylamide dip that you can use to finish off stuff. Primarily, it is used in the automotive and tool construction industries. It was primarily used to kind of insulate handles, and in the costuming, we kind of adapted it to finish off corset binding or boning to give softer edges so that boning didn't rip through the edges of corsets and things like that. Plasti Dip is its aerosolated brother. Now with Plasti Dip, that's one of those things that I usually recommend when you're working with it. Work with it as it's warm. If you're working with it in cold temperatures, warm it up just a little bit in some like tepid water just to get a nice clean uniform spray, and make sure you clean the tip whenever you're done using it so that you don't get buildup and you don't have the sprayer kind of give up on you. Paints, if you don't want to invest in an airbrush or an air compressor, which can run you upwards of $100 for just the compressor itself, and that's not counting like the $60 to $80 for a nice entry-level airbrush, as well as the cleaners, the proper paints, and stuff like that. You can look into spray paint and get certain applications in a nice way with spray paints. They're developing a lot of them now with finer precision tips and the ability to get into places where airbrushes also do. However, airbrushes do allow you a certain amount of artistry and detail orientation. So you're able to get a lot finer precision with an airbrush. And it is a good skill to learn, but it is expensive. So if you can't afford that, spray paint is your next best buddy. Closures and attachments. So bodysuits. Bodysuits are usually the place that you see a lot of these armors attached, but a lot of times, spandex is not the friend of heavy objects. If you don't want your cod piece to drape on the floor, you probably want to reinforce those snaps or magnets or however you are attaching it. Now, this can be through snaps. This can be through parachute clips or clasps. This can be through D-rings. This can be through belting. But if you're directly attaching it to the bodysuit, you want to make sure that you have some sort of stable twill or ribbon fabric in between the layers so that it keeps it from stretching out and malforming the bodysuit, changing the bodysuit and not making it reinforced. So you want to make sure you keep that in mind. Other items you can use to build off your armor, if you want to just have these around, they're very helpful in a pinch. If you're doing a last minute armor build, which I know all of you are into, Con Crunch, the cereal. Part 2. Googly eyes. School brads are good. They're basically those brass brads that make for adjustable joints. Resin gems, which I do have a panel on, but we're not going to be doing that this weekend, are very cool. And LED lighting. Now, LED lighting is super fun and can add a lot of pep to a costume. And a lot of times you can find strands of LED lights everywhere now because everybody wants to decorate their rooms with them. But yeah, so we're going to move on. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. So I got very well explained in the chat. So thank you very much, heart. All right, guys. So your base materials, Worbla, which is kind of what we all know in the world of cosplay. We all kind of know it as the mother of all invention. But did any of you know that it was actually a waste product? It was actually created from pine sawdust and sawdust from sawmills and things like that. And it was filled with wood filler. And it was basically a resin that was cooked for a very long amount of time with this wood filler that made it so that you get a shiny side that's a little bit smoother, which is the more adhesive side. And you get the matte side, which has much more texture or filler or surface area. Some people like to say that it is good for creating sandwiches, which is what I call the lamination style, which is a very popular way of building armor where you sandwich or laminate a piece of foam or other filler between two layers of Worbla. Because of its sticky properties and the fact that it has a texture to it, it can be made into what we call in the industry Worbla pie. So if you have scraps and bits and pieces of Worbla, save it because you can join it back together into a quite so smooth little pie, but it can still be used for smaller applications like hair pieces or props where you just need a little bit of Worbla. Worbla Black Art was created with cosplayers in mind with a smaller filler, which meant it had a finer surface texture, and it also came in black with the idea that you would not have to base or prime your costume out in a tone to paint it a different color. Now, this was primarily created for costuming. It was kind of a newer version of their original Worbla formula, and Worbla is actually a German made product, or it was traditionally, and it actually goes by a different name there. If you look at your sheets of Worbla, I am sorry, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I know it starts with an RH. But yes, so we are going to move on to Worbla Red. So for any of you who haven't heard of Worbla Red, it is actually made for industrial use, costume use on a professional level. So it's used a lot more in the theater realm. It's used a lot more in applications that are more official. It is fire retardant, which means that it does not take to burning very well, and it is better to use in applications where you may have a lot of heat or light style applications to it. It is red in color to reflect the name Worbla Red, just to also kind of reinforce that it is fire retardant. So that if you have it in your stash, you're not going to confuse it with any of the other materials. So Wonderflex. Wonderflex is Worbla without the filler, and it has a fine netting back to it. So what it is basically is the adhesive. It's kind of a clear, transparent, translucent-y kind of material. Now it has this mesh in it because it was kind of designed to act like fiberglass. And fiberglass is a very popular item to use in a lot of prop making because it's lightweight and it can be used to build a lot of different objects very quickly. You can basically kind of treat it as a vacuform situation. You can build on it. You can make hats and things that won't weigh a lot, but do accomplish a very kind of whimsical look without too much worry. Now, Wonderflex is kind of the application of fiberglass without the worry of breathing in fiberglass, because fiberglass is glass fibers and inherently is bad to breathe in, but Wonderflex gives you the application with much more, I would say, fine motor detail to me, because you're not having to worry about the tiny fibers and filaments of the fiberglass when you're working with it. I also would say it is a little bit cheaper in application as well. Transparart is basically Wonderflex without the mesh. Now, Transparart has also been designed to take to forming with thermodynamics a little bit more easily than other plastics, so it can be a lower temperature melting point, which can be a little bit harder to work with. However, it has a great application for luminescence or flame or water applications, or some sort of application where you're getting a shiny or whimsical or maybe a prop build, or even a hollow, kind of glass, seeing through the looking glass mirror texture. You can work with Transparart and get these kind of applications to it. Cosplayflex is basically just the first, I think it was one of the first companies besides Worbla that built Worbla style thermoplastics, but a different way. So they didn't actually start out as a waste product filled with wood filler. They started out with a finer surface texture, and they actually were built specifically for cosplayers in the way that they are white or gray in color, and so you don't have to pre-prime or pre-coat it to get to painting. It has a finer surface texture that isn't quite as fine as Worbla Black Art. I believe that Cosplayflex came out and then Worbla Black Art came out. And Cosplayflex ends up having a little bit of a more texture to it, but it's still a good product. Now, friendly plastic. A lot of you, if you have used friendly plastic, have probably used it to create things like nails or fake teeth or small things, pellety things. Because what it is it's pellets that come in different colorations, and what happens is you boil it in water. So once you boil it in water, they become translucent, and then you can change them and mold them and then put them back in the water if you still need to work with them. That's why they're called friendly plastic. They're primarily non-toxic. They don't have a lot of fumes. They're nice to work with in an area, especially if you have younger people working with you on costumes. They're very friendly plastic. Fibra itself, I have heard described as stretchy and super malleable, or basically plastic and bubblegum. If plastic and bubblegum were melded together, that would be Fibra. Fibra is a little bit of a newer material. It is stretchy and it takes to shapes really, really well. It has a very, very smooth surface because it is primarily made with the plasticine. And the only problem, the only downside is that because it is like bubblegum, it is like tack, it is like sticky tack, it will show fingerprints and nail marks. However, you can mitigate that by just treating the surface of it with a little bit of sandpaper, or I've even heard some people like to use acetone with it. However, I do recommend to only do that if you've tested it and you're working in a well-ventilated area and all that other fun stuff. Kydex is a plastic that is primarily used in I've seen it more so used in ballistics. So it's more so used for creating holsters, for vacuum forming to specific shapes. I've also seen it used in nautical, so boat or automotive applications as well. It's a nice thick plastic. There is also another plastic that has come out that has like Cobra Cast. And Cobra Cast, I believe, is another ballistics plastic that, again, was heavily developed to be used by, I believe, cosplayers for building things as well. Other products that you may have heard of that have come out recently, or not super recently, but in the past decade, I'd say, is fairly recently. Worbla's Pearly Art, Crystal Art, Deco Art, Cobra Cast Art, like I mentioned, Worbla's Mesh Art, and many others. I want you to make sure, though, and pay attention, though, that you are using a respirator, and especially I am going to mention Sintra. Now, does anybody know Sintra? Has anybody heard of Sintra before? Ooh, we've got some awesome photos and pricing in our chat for Worbla. I am local to the Nova, DC, Baltimore, Maryland area, and I find that actually the cheapest place I get my Worbla is, I believe it's $60 for a large sheet from Third Eye Comics. They also are a local comic book store to the Maryland area, so definitely showing them some love during this time is super awesome. All right, so Sintra is a plastic that a lot of people like to use because it is hardy. It's got a lot of body to it, and it works really, really great for things like harnesses, for big pieces, while being very, very lightweight, so it doesn't put a lot of stress on your body. However, it's also called Comatex, expanded PVC foam, closed-cell PVC foam. But, and a big but, is that the fumes it gives off when it's heated are hydrochloric acid gas. Can any of the class tell me what happens when you mix a hydrochloric acid gas with, the moisture inside your lungs? Becomes hydrochloric acid, and you can get a chemical pneumonia in this case if you are not practicing safe cosplay building. I don't want any of you to get sick. I don't want any of you to get hurt. So make sure that you are working in a well-ventilated space with a buddy. I just want you guys to be safe with this because it can give off hydrochloric acid gas. And that is not super fun. I don't want anybody getting chemical pneumonia. It's not a good time. Does not make for a good time. You can't party as much. You party way less. Characteristics of styrene and EVA foam. So styrene is the foam that we all kind of built our old like science projects with. It has that kind of foamy texture to it. It can take dents and cuts really well without actually retaining them because you can heat it back up. And a lot of time, if it's very shallow cuts or dents, it will have self-healing properties and pop right back into place. All right, we're going to move on. So we're going to talk a little bit about 3D printing. So 3D printing, the origin story, the grand origin story. It started out as something called stereolithography and is credited to Charles W. Hull in the 1980s after failed efforts and experience by previous teams, primarily the team of Dr. Kodama. Cheap alternatives to creating prototypes. So it was used a lot for creating these basic items that had a quicker turnaround time than a lot of other industries. So the only problem with stereolithography is that it was a little bit more, it was a little bit more technical. So the way that it created these quicker alternatives was by slices. So stereolithography is kind of creating these slices that kind of join together to create the item. However, versus the opposite or the other ways that they were making prototypes before, it offered a very economic way over those older time-consuming techniques. It cut time for the molding, the casting, the finishing, and then having to send it back and change it. And we have a lot of applications with it now with actual reverse engineering that a lot of people are doing to fit 3D printing and 3D items back into things that they need to modify, which is super great for accessibility and alternatives when you're building costumes. The auto, medical, watchmaking, jewelry, aeronautical engineering, so many industries used stereolithography and 3D printing, and it can be applied to many more. It allows creators to print rapidly and has the ability to modify prototypes so that the turnaround is much quicker. 3D printers, now, this is not everything that they can work with, but this is kind of where we start. So thermoplastic filaments started with wax, metals, bones, organs, and tumors. Optical links for conductivity, circuitry, fabrics and flexible materials, and even food. I've seen 3D printers with, doing chocolate work, doing fancy molds for cake work. Now I have a question in the chat about fabrics and flexible materials. A lot of the 3D printed fabrics or flexible materials you're seeing nowadays are things that are more akin to armor than fabric. They're more akin to scale mail or ring mail because of the way that the material has a bit of a hardier texture. Now, stereolithography. Let's dive a little deeper into that because I don't know how many people have heard of stereolithography before. And I'm knocking over things. Yay. So exciting. Stereolithography is so exciting. I have to kick over my pattern paper. 3D system software that cut 3D shapes into slices. So basically it created thousands of cross sections, millions of cross sections in bigger projects. And it had an apparatus that initially was a photopolymer UV sensitive resin. So you had to have the liquid resin and then a curing light and then the liquid resin and the curing light. And the laser kind of shined into the vat and traced the shape. Now, with the UV light application, since it cured the resin, those shapes kind of hardened and expensive, including the materials, the filaments, the 3D printer itself, as well as the technology and the upkeep. It can be very expensive. Now, I have seen quite a few entry-level printers at Staples, at office supply stores, $100. But then, of course, you have to buy the filament and stuff like that and the technology, so you have to learn how to use it. In the chat, what do we have? How much do they cost? So 3D printers, I've seen entry-level ones cost anywhere from $100 to $120. They can cost well over tens of thousands of dollars depending on their application. Now, if you can't afford those kind of price points, local libraries, tech shops or maker studios, and hacker spaces sometimes do actually facilitate these as long as you pay for the filament and the time. It depends on the membership, it depends on their practices, but you can check and see if you've got a local maker space, and if you can support them, that would be super awesome. Now, places that you could find patterns for this are things like Shapeways, Sculpteo, and then places if you can't access it and you don't want to deal with a lot of stuff, and you just kind of want to print out something that's pre-made without too much hassle, are places like Staples and UPS. Now, I know it's very specific, Staples and UPS. Not every UPS has a 3D printer capability or availability. So, it's just one of those things you want to do a lot of research in your local area. Make those connections, make those relationships, network. So the current evolution is used more in final production. So nowadays we see it a lot more as applications where the prototype is actually the final evolution of the product, or people are reverse engineering from the point of an item that has been built. Now, we've seen that recently in an Italian place where they were trying to reverse engineer respirators to have a piece that enabled for, I believe it was like a cleaning process or another type of process that enabled respirators to respirators to handle multiple people. So it's just a matter of that reverse engineering I was talking about. Now, a lot of 3D printing plastics, the top on the market tend to be ABS or acrylamide butadiene styrene, which is a kind of the entry-level one. It's usually the one you see a lot of places. It's the one that is most talked about, the one that is most used, and it's inexpensive to get. PLA, which is the polylactic acid, is easy to print and it's biodegradable. However, because it is biodegradable, the prints can degrade over time and it has a little bit of a rough texture finish because it's polylactic acid. PVA or polyvinyl alcohol is water soluble and easy to print. However, it requires a hotter temperature, it risks toxic fumes, and it can be quite expensive. However, if you use PVA to print into something, because it is water soluble, you can do a resist. You can do a mold or an item where part of it washes away. So if you have something where you want to insert into the 3D print, you can use PVA to create that relief. Nylon is a very popular polymer as well because it is a recyclable polymer. Synthetic polymers originally created as a replacement for silk, but has so many applications, and its tensile strength is very, very nice. It's tough and inexpensive, but the downside is that it is a high temperature melting point, and it can give off again those toxic fumes. Hdpe or high density polyethylene is a nice plastic. It is something that we deal with every day in our everyday life, bottle lids and other plastics we have around our house. It's easy to dissolve and it is lightweight. However, it does have a high temperature melting point. Now, actually, I think most 3D plastics are actually recyclable to some extent because the fiber and the filaments are thermoplastics. So inherently, you can make a filament from some of them depending on how many times you use it. There is a certain tensile life, there is a certain life to those filaments. So, over time they will degrade. Now, more 3D materials that you may not have heard of, but PETT is one of those materials, again, that we hear of a lot in our environment. It is used a lot in bottles and consumer goods. It's T glacé or polyethylene terephthalate. Oh, I got that one the first time this time. It's food safe and it can have a glass look finish. However, it's slow to print and it needs a heated printing bed. So it needs not only the 3D head to feed hot plastic, but it also needs the base to be heated so that it doesn't cool and stick basically to the printer bed. Now, these other filaments are still kind of in the experimental stage, but a lot of people have been working with them in their printer are things like wood filament. So fine wood particles, kind of like we think of Worbla. Worbla itself is similar to this material. It's a wood and resin or wood and acrylamide mixture. And it's usually mixed with PLA as the polymer base. The nice thing is that it has a wood look to it. And depending on the pigments, you then create false rings and other textures. However, it is finicky to use because it does have a bit more surface area than other plastics, and it does require finishing, sanding, priming, anything like that. Metal filament is used primarily more in aeronautical, engineering, jewelry making, and watchmaking, and things like that. It is finely ground metal material combined with PLA or other polymers, and it has a metal-like finish. However, it is very expensive, and it can be quite finicky to use. Carbon fiber. Now, I know a lot of us, we think sci-fi, we think carbon fiber, we think these filaments of texture. It mimics a carbon fiber as the lightweight strength. Because the fibers are like a little bit longer, they're still staple fibers, but they're not as short as a lot of staple fibers we see in fabrics. they mimic that lightweight but hardiness, so that resistance, that toughness. It can be quite hard on the mechanical hardware because of the filaments, and it is quite expensive. Now, in the still experimental stage, we see flexible filaments and conductive filaments. So these flexible filaments that enable us to have a little bit more kind of posability or pressure resistance. And conductive filaments, we're seeing that a lot more in the fabric application, creating LED fabrics or reactive fabrics or wearable reactive items, as opposed to other applications. But I'm sure that there are so many applications conductive filaments are being used in, especially electronics. Now, examples in cosplay. I've just shot a lot of this information at you, so I know your brains are probably just bored to tears. So I'm going to show you some lovely, lovely cosplay woo, like your kind of steps to start. Loom Cluster is an amazing cosplayer and actually started her 3D printing process, their 3D printing process, to build armor, to build organic looking armor that and they taught themselves this whole process over the months that they built this as a beginner with the software. She created their own medieval inspired sovereign armor is what it was called. It was called Dreamer Regalia. And it was worn by Felicia Day. Now, Loom Cluster has moved on to different projects, as you see in the second photo, and they're just amazing. Go follow them, go watch them. They're just an amazing maker and builder. More examples. So places that we may have started when we're dealing with fabric and prototypes and stuff like that. A lot of stereolithography actually started to help build prosthetics and assist people who have lost body parts or work in robotics and build pieces for that. Then, of course, we've also got people using it to 3D print pieces of shoes and design fashion and make it more functional without having weight. So things like 3D printed foam bottoms or the whole shoe in this case was 3D printed. And then of course, we have a dragon scale fabric. We use that term loosely, that was created by Shori Designs on Thingiverse to attach to a fabric base to make it much more flexible. So what it does is it enables the user to use it more as a fabric, but it still operates kind of like a fashion armor. Now, this is part of some of my process. I know it doesn't look quite as pretty, but this was when I was first getting into armor. I have a lovely, lovely friend called No Flutter, and she did a collection of Sailor Moon alternative. And I loved her Amazonian Jupiter. And so what I did was I actually did not a laminating procedure per se, but I did more of a kind of sandwiching procedure where I actually did foam on the bottom and then I layered the foam in layers to create depth. And then on top of that, I put Worbla. Now you can see I kind of tacked it around the edges because Worbla is expensive. So I was trying to be quite aware of my use of the thermoplastic. But I still think I got a pretty good texture and I can go in with paints and add more. But yeah. So these are my parting words to you guys. And I just want to tell you to be safe with construction. Always wear a respirator when you're dealing with chemicals or treating foam or painting or 3D printing. Practice safety and always follow protocol, especially your safety data sheet. And if you're working with technical machinery, get any training you can and learn all you can about the art of science of it. If it's between books, if it's YouTube learning, if it's that you hook up with a mentor that is at a maker space or a hacker space, network, network, network. Always work with a buddy around in case of emergency, but make sure you have fun throughout the process. And if you have any questions, I will be here for a little while longer to hang out with you guys and answer those. And I'm thinking because it is a little bit quiet today, we can probably just unmute mics and ask questions that way. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really insightful and helpful. My question for you is, what material do you like to use the most and why? Because you said so many materials, so I'm wondering what you usually work with.
As far as the Worbla family of materials, I still prefer the original Worbla, and I think it's just a nostalgia aspect to it because I like the kind of wood grain texture because it enables me to take it down to the smoothness that I like, and I'm a little bit of a control freak when it comes to building my armor and stuff like that. I don't mind the other materials, but a lot of them have different ratios of the adhesive to the filler or the no filler. And I would say I first worked with Worbla and Wonderflex, which is the mesh one that's more like fiberglass, because I worked with fiberglass back in my art school days. So those two were kind of my entries into working with those thermoplastics and those armors materials. Newer stuff, I have some Kydex to play with, but it is so darn thick that like I need an industrial space to work with it. Like it is literally like the dashboard of your car, like the side of a seat of a boat. It is that thick. And I'm thick, I get it, like it's attractive, but at the same time, it is much harder to work with. There are thinner amounts, like thinner sheets of Kydex and Cobra Cast and things like that you can get. But a lot of these thermoplastics, if you're working in a small place like I am, like my studio is not too huge, but you know, it's one of those things where I don't have space, like safe space away from all my fabrics for industrial grade construction equipment and tools and things like that to do a lot of this stuff. So I have to do it outside or I have to do it in smaller increments. So it's a lot harder to work with.
And then I have another question. So I've seen some people, I don't know if this is like a good idea or not, but using a hair dryer to melt and mold friendly plastic. But don't you think it would be easier to boil it in water to like mold it longer though? I was just like curious about that.
So friendly plastic is actually made to be boiled. It's not usually made to just be heated because you can't get an even heating on the piece itself if you're just heating the outside. Now, if you heat it for long enough, heck yeah, you can get something to work with. But if you boil it in water, then you have a longer working time because you have the water and it's hot. So like if it starts to cool down and get less malleable, you can just pop it back in the water. It's one of those things where cosplayers don't always practice the best possible scenario for a lot of stuff. And a lot of that is just because we learn it's quick. It's quick. You know, it's something that they're like, oh, I can just do it quick. I don't have to wait for the water to boil. I don't have to wait for stuff to heat up and I can just go, go, go. Now, that doesn't always make for best construction practices. As we all know, I mentioned a little earlier, the con crunch is a very real and very, very serious thing for a lot of folks. But for me, I would boil it. I don't like that a lot of people feel rushed, but I understand where that need comes from. If that's the way they learn to deal with it, if that's what they've been seeing people online that they look up to, or mentors, or people that they see as professional doing it, or even professionals, I know some professionals have been known to have bad habits and are teaching them off to people, then that's just how they learn to do it. It's not inherently wrong in practice because it gets them to where they want to go, but the material is not made primarily for that application, so they'd be served much more purpose using it in its proper application.
And then my follow-up question is, if you were to make like makeup prosthetics, like fangs and such, like do you think that friendly plastic would be a better material to use that for, or is there a material you recommend?
It depends on the type of teeth. Scarecrow and other Fang manufacturers have actually upped their game in the last few years from just being your run-of-the-mill Halloween company. There are also companies, I believe, like I think they're called Vampire Fangs. I don't know them, so you'd have to do a lot more research, but a lot of companies that are out there that can make you prosthetic fangs that'll fit you immaculately. However, if you're just trying to make them super cheap, super easy, you're just making them kind of like a retainer to pop in and pop out for photos.
Yes.
Friendly plastic, because it has non-toxic properties, is used in that application in theater. It's used in that application in building and professional like setups because it's made to be used for that. But I would say out of all the plastics, friendly plastic would be the only one I would feel safe doing that with.
Okay, thank you. What is a project that you're working on now with thermoplastics?
I've actually taken a little bit of a break from cosplaying, but I do use stuff in fashion, and I'm working on a set of armor right now that is forest core, or like fable core, I think is what it's called, where it's like it's basically going to be a set of armor that has gemstones growing out of it, and it is still kind of a work in progress, but I'm hoping to create crystals that kind of are illuminated in certain hollows on the armor. It's still kind of I don't really want to show it to anybody quite yet, but yeah, that's kind of my next big project with it. I've been using it a lot more in fashion applications than cosplay as of recent, but a lot of that is just because my job. I have to eventually I have to do fashion shows. Eventually I have to get back to photography and things like that. So I like to have pieces that I can make my own and replicate for sale. So it's one of those things where I don't want to borrow someone else's IP, like an anime character or whatever, and try and resell it as fan art or something like that. There are a lot of people out there that make great business with that, but that's not what I want my focus to be. But in chat, do we have anybody else working with thermoplastics? You want to let me know your next project, or if you've got a project you're working on? If you have any questions on the project, now would be a great time to ask those questions.
I'm just trying to do basic stuff right now, and so I was just trying to make like simple things. So I was asking.
No, that's okay. One of my first bigger builds with thermoplastics was, as you saw, the no flutter armor, and then also I did Kugyoku Ren from Magi, and I just used it to create her chopstick, her hair piece, and the bracelet. It's like a hair clasp that goes around her little bunny ears, and so I used it, and I can pull my chopstick out, or like her magical item, I can remove it from my hair because of the way I built it. So it's kind of cool to get those props where you're able to build them. And with Worbla and things like that, it was just scraps. It was the scraps I had. I rolled them into little Worbla snakes and I painted them gold, and they turned out really well.
I do have one question though. So I am thinking about making a horn kind of come out of my forehead. But I wasn't sure like how to tackle that. Like if I should use like a thermoplastic or foam, because I am such a novice and everything.
Is this for Nezuko?
No, it's not actually. I know it sounds like that. No, the fangs were for Cruel from Seraph of the End, yes. And then the horn was from Elma from Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. But I actually am working on a Nezuko, so that's actually really funny.
So as far as building horns and things like that, these are my horns that I got were resin. However, what I would say for you, depending on the size, I guess, because you're trying to do Seraph of the End, I know Kamui Cosplay recently came out with a foam set of horn patterns. Also, I want to say Bob Duran of Foamsmith, or is it Bob or Bill? Bill Duran. If you look up Punished Props and you look up foam smithing, those two creators are super awesome when it comes to foam building. And I know Bill Duran and his wife of Punished Props are super awesome, and they have a few books out. And I would say, I know they had a few horn patterns. I know Kamui Cosplay came out with like a compendium of horn patterns in recent years. So if you're wanting to build them out of those materials, I would look into their patterning techniques. Even if you don't decide to use their patterns, they have a good understanding of how to do things like taper thermoplastics or foams so that they come to a nice clean point. Or they have a good way of creating your own patterns based on the same principles, so you can kind of apply them across your practice, your building practice. I want to say Ted of Evil Ted Props is also really, really good on that end as well, like foam building. He doesn't do a lot of thermoplastic stuff, but he's really good about foam building and those applications as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. I actually wrote it down, so I'm going to look at it later. And then there's some questions too in the chat as well.
Okay. I think my phone might have died, so if you could read them off to me, that would be super helpful.
No problem. So Brazilian Mafioso asked, I'm trying to make a Splatoon ink tank with better plastic. To make a water tube, what do you recommend?
I would say PETT or PLA would probably be good. It depends though if you're going to be doing it 3D printing or if you're doing it with thermoplastics. If you're going with the thermoplastics, just like the ones that you're going to form with your hands instead of using a technical machine, I would say a lot of the plastics that I would probably use for that would be like vacuum forming plastics. Now, a lot of those tend to require a negative, so your mold or your form that you're going to be building a relief of. I want to say that recently I know it was on YouTube, but there was this set of creators that was doing like a cosplay in a day, and they did a Splatoon ink child. And they did, I believe, the squid ink gun. If I can remember it, I will share it on the event page, but I would say look up Cosplay Splatoon build, and you can probably find the YouTube video on how they did it. I want to say it was like a budget cosplay build because they did it and it was like inexpensive. It was like stuff from your closet and they just kind of built it from there. But I would probably just use PLA, or in the case of like Worbla, the family of Worbla plastics, I would look into. It really depends. Are you trying to, you said, are you lighting it up on the inside or putting, you said like a water resistant package to get some of that? I would say, because it's really hard to water seal thermoplastic. You can, it just takes a lot more finessing because you have to make the two parts of the form and then seal it, unless you do some sort of internal like system where it is like an enclosed bottle inside. I would say, go ahead.
They said I want to light it up inside.
You just want to light it up inside. Okay, well then, yeah, you could use a vacuum forming style of making it. Create your negative, like your basically your mold, your relief, and then use. I would say you could use. You could probably use Wonderflex. You could use the Transparent Art. You could use Worbla. Now, the only thing is, if you use the clear plastics, you're going to have issues with diffusion. But if you fill the, give me just 1 second. I'm giving my computer a chance to catch up, apparently. If you want to diffuse the light, that's going to give you a lot better like application, because if you just have a pinpoint of light, it's going to be really harsh. It's not going to give you a nice finish. So what you want to do is, if you're going to use a clear material, have something inside to diffuse it. Ooh, give me just a second. I'm going to pop off my camera for a second. If you want to have diffusion, you just want to use the clear plastic and then have something in it like Plastizote, which is a very popular foam. You can get this a lot from packaging. It helps to just soften the LEDs. However, you can also paint or fill the item with other materials to kind of diffuse that light. If you use Worbla or another type of material that has a surface area or a surface texture to it, it's going to kind of diffuse that light, but it may not give you the clear bottle-like texture you want. So I would probably use things like the transparent art or the clear ones and use Plastizote or something else inside to diffuse it.
Okay, so I have one comment from Raven. Raven's Ornaments. I've been wanting to start Fibra armor.
Is really great. I think it's really pretty, and there are a lot of cosplayers who have gone into working with it and building with it. I don't mind Fibra. It is very, very conducive to taking to filigree molds, to being formed by hand, to being processed a lot. It just takes a lot of detail orientation because it takes to finger imprints and it takes to tool imprints really, really well. But again, like I described it before, it's almost as if plastic and bubblegum had a baby together. So it can be very temperamental. But it's a good place to start. I want to say if you look up Fibra Athena's armor, there is a cosplayer who recently created a set of Roman-inspired Athena, or Grecian-inspired Athena armor, and she used primarily Fibra as her material. I want to say she does. I think they worked with the Worbla Twitch channel. Is it Vicky Bunny? No, there's a lot of cosplay in the Twitch world and the streaming realm, but there are a lot of cosplayers who have worked with Fibra, and I would say if you look up Fibra armor, you can probably find one or two that actually have like blogs of tutorials of how to work with them, with the material.
And then there's a question from A-Rock. What's the best place to buy fabric for cheap, in your opinion, that is?
Ooh, it really just depends on if you are looking to, I don't know, it depends on what you're looking for. Now, I know that a lot of people like to kind of spend budget on fabric that they can feel. Now, with that, the only downside is that you end up having to choose kind of between Joann's and then whatever mom and pop shop you have, if you still are lucky enough to have a mom and pop shop around you at all. So what ends up happening is that you have to kind of just go with whatever's there. But if you start to get more knowledgeable about the fabrics you can find at Joann's and things like that, there are places online. I actually have a big collection of fabric merchants that I usually use. Fabrics.com is fine, but they're also owned by Amazon, and you can kind of see their stock either on Amazon's page or on fabric.com. And a lot of times they actually counter price each other, which to me is kind of weird and silly for being under the same company and kind of, I don't know, it's kind of sketchy. I know that there's Fabrics LA, which is a company that's based in California. A lot of these independent fabric owned websites are kind of sketchy and sometimes don't even sell retail. They primarily sell wholesale. So even if you buy through them, a lot of times you'll end up having to get a call or an email from them and having to confirm it before they'll even charge your card and send you your fabric through the mail. Places like Spandex House or Spandex World are especially notorious for that kind of practice because they're traditionally used to working with the dance companies, the theaters in New York. So they primarily call and make sure that you're ordering, the correct thing. They're used to building these relationships with their clients. I would also say Hancocks of Paducah is they're not related to the Hancocks that went bankrupt at all, but they're a great place for quilting patterns, really high-end quilting cottons and cotton prints. I'm trying to think of other companies that I like to work with. I would say a lot of times if you check costuming groups and stuff like that, if you have cosplay groups that you're friends with and things like that, there are hundreds of merchants. I could go on and on all day. I know that on my website, if you check out strawberrypaperdoll.webs.com, I have a blog post that I do try to keep fairly well updated with that information, like with the rotation of fabric merchants that I upgrade if I ever see positive kind of reviews for them, or if my personal reaction is that with them is positive. So you can definitely check out my website, and I have a full rundown list of the places I like to buy from. Now, to train yourself to be better able to see quality or to match the fabrics, you can hit up Joann's and feel, and then order the fabric online or order swatches. Swatches are huge to order online if you're ever worried about paying, an exorbitant fee for the fabric. Always order swatches. And you can kind of tell the different quality. The only downside to that is that swatches do take extra time. There is extra time when you're ordering online. So it's that case of you have 3 characteristics for a costume. You can choose 2 of those things and it will work okay, but you can't have all 3. So that is usually time, quality, or budget. Now, if you have quality and it's within your budget, it's going to take a long time. If you have time and quality, because it's quick but it's high quality, it's going to cost a lot more. So you have to think of those 3 kind of tiers of the pieces of costume building. And depending on what you're looking for, sometimes you get lucky and you get all 3, but that's not always what's going to happen. I'm sorry, I get nervous, so I giggle to myself sometimes. Whew.
Does anyone else have any last questions? Oh, there's a comment. I should start getting a sewing kit.
Really good to have just in general. I mean, the ones you get from hotels aren't usually the best quality, but you can buy a lot of materials. There's a company I like to use called Wawak, so WAWAK, and they are primarily for tailors and people who work within the sewing industry, but they do sell a lot of the same materials you'll find on eBay, Alibaba, and stuff like that for less expensive. And depending on where you live, the shipping is actually super quick. So for me, I live in the Maryland, Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania, DC area. I primarily order from them, and because they have a base in New York, I can usually order something the night before and get it the next afternoon. But they only, I believe, have workhouses or workspaces in certain areas. And right now, due to our certain environmental climate that we're all going through right now, they do have a limit on certain items. And things like when the masks got really big and popular, they ran out of elastic for a long time. But they do update you. They do keep you in the loop, and they're very quick to get back to you as soon as they get stuff in stock. Yeah. But that's where I would look into wawak.com and getting your materials there. They have great scissors for good quality. They have nicer irons if you end up wanting to get into higher end tailoring or higher end building. You can grow from a lot of their basic materials into a nicer, like a gravity fed iron, which is the iron that feeds water from a tank and never runs out of steam. Or you can get a tailoring body double, and you can have a model to drape stuff on. Yeah. yeah, if we don't have any other questions or anything like that, y'all can find me on my social media. I'm also part of an anime and Japanese culture podcast called Anime Jam Session on Tuesday nights, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. And also, I usually just hang out in my studio. So I just kind of chill out and sew and have fun. But yeah, so if we have no other questions or anything like that, I will bid you guys adieu.
Thank you so much for your panel. It was amazing. And I also really appreciate the science safety and the science facts. Because you rarely hear that.
That always gets me brownie points with engineers. That always, I think I still have it. Oh gosh, where did I put it? I used to have this little note. Oh, is it right here? Yeah, I do. I still have it. Okay, so like every now and then at panels and stuff, apparently there are people that'll go around to panels and they will just go and be like, so thanks for presenting. There were at least 2 engineers in your panel today. And it's like they did learn something and they used their brains and it made them laugh. So it's just kind of nice to hear that people appreciate the safety, because I feel like it's not talked enough about. We're all having fun and it is a hobby, but I feel like safety is a big practice that sometimes we are a little bit negligible about. We don't think about it until we have the chemical pneumonia or we're dealing with the effects of E6000 use without a respirator. You know, it's just one of those things that I felt like we weren't touching on it enough and it needed to be addressed. So I appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I didn't even know one of those materials can make hydrochloric acid. I'm like, oh, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, it can be a little scary, and a lot of people like to use thermoplastics by putting them into their ovens, and I'm like, yes, plastic coating on my chicken dinner. That sounds so delightful. It's like baking Sculpey in your oven. You traditionally want to have a separate oven for any plastics or clays and things like that, any crafting materials, because you're going to get a coating of chemicals, a fine coating of chemicals on the inside of your oven. I know on, was it Cosplay Wars, or what was that? I know it was like the one with Yaya Han. Was it the cosplay competition where?
Yes, I know you're talking. It was as Cosplay Off or something, like
Cosplay Off or something, whatever it was.
Yeah,
but it had like people putting their thermoplastics in ovens. Now that was fine because those ovens were specifically designated for those materials, but we're all not that fortunate to have a whole secondary kitchen, a whole secondary toaster oven for specifically thermoplastic materials. So because we don't, and I don't want anybody getting chemically sick, you know, I don't usually recommend heating your thermoplastics in the oven. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for coming, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day and enjoy the other panels. What's the next panel coming up? Is there one tomorrow?
So actually there's one that's gonna start in, well, it's supposed to be 3 minutes, but the panelist is a little late, so probably start 10 minutes late. But we have a snapshot, quality photos, and simple tips panel, just a beginner's guide to photography. And then at 9:00 p.m. today, we're gonna have Frills, Swirls, Magical Girls Jeopardy Edition, and that will be a game show testing all your Magical Girl knowledge. And those will all be right here on Discord.
Yay, awesome. I'll have to pop in later to participate or listen and learn some new stuff. So I hope you guys join us for those future panels. And thank you very much for having me. And I hope you guys have a good night.
Thank you. Okay. So since the panelists will be a little bit late, I was thinking of filling up the time by watching some terrible Sword Art Online abridged series. Would that be okay for everyone?
You said terrible,
yeah,
but that's fine.
Let me pull that up.
I mean, I've watched abridged Akame Got Killed, so this is not so. SAO abridged is nothing.
Oh no, Sword Art Online abridged is actually better than the actual show.
Still up. That'd be. You know what? I'm down. Let's do it.
Okay, let me try this. See how well this works. I've been having problems with YouTube. I don't know if it's just me. Can anyone hear that?
Yeah.
So is the sound okay for everyone watching?
Ha 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 ha.
I get it.
Wait. There's more. Ha.
Oh
Riveting.
God.
Well, whatever. I'll just pull the nerve gear off. Like so.
Hey, dumbass, it doesn't work that way. The nerve gear disables your motor function so you don't move around while you play. Don't you remember all those videos of the beta testers?
Whoa. It's so lifelike.
Oh, hey, man, how's the beta? So many lawsuits.
Do you feel tingly?
No, why?
What the hell is that?
Well, Ballsy, I believe the locals call it a hexagon? Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'll have to check back with you.
Off.
And the sky is bleeding.
Man, they're really working for that M rating.
Oh my god, what's going on?
Don't worry, baby. I'll protect you.
Oh, it's person.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am Kayaba Akihiko, head programmer. Welcome to the unparalleled online experience that is Sword Art Online. Hello, people. Kind of talking here. Focus. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and disable general chat here.
Do you think he realizes he just muted himself?
Give it a minute.
Alright, I just realized what happened there. It's very funny, but right now, serious time. How many of you have seen Tron? Huh? What? Seriously? None of you have seen Tron? I was really banking on that. Okay, no problem. I can wing this. Much like the world of Warcraft, none of you are here by choice anymore. Unlike WoW, however, you're being held here by me, not by your need to escape your empty f***ing lives. There is no longer any way to log out of Sword Art Online. If someone on the outside attempts to log you out by removing your nerve gear, well, has anyone seen Scanners? Scanners. It's a movie that... Seriously? Okay, please. Here we go. Watch this. Okay, that was from Scanners. And basically that. Okay, finally seeing some gears turning. We're making progress.
Why would you do such a thing?
Steven? Steven, is that you? Steven, how are you enjoying that advanced copy?
I'm playing with my family.
Oh, that's right. Happy birthday, Timmy. They grew up so fast. Cherish these moments, Steven. Cherish these moments. So, as I was saying, the only way to keep the nerve gear from going all Gallagher on your gray matter is to make your way through Castle Aincrad and beat Sword Art Online.
So, you want us to beat an MMO?
Essentially.
F you!
Whoa, getting a lot of hostility here. Don't appreciate it.
Well, honestly, when was the last time you heard of someone beating EverQuest?
When was the last time you heard of someone playing EverQuest?
That's fair.
Anywho, for all you guys who wanted to play as girls, and you know who you are, well, I've got a surprise for you.
Kirito? You're not a girl!
And you're not 17?
I'm okay with this!
Me too!
Love knows no gender!
You look so young.
And you look less hairy balls.
My name is Klein.
No, it's not.
As you can see, I have peeled away your petty facades and revealed you for what you truly are. Fairly attractive 20-somethings, apparently. Good for you! Kind of undermines the whole cold light of day thing I had planned, but still, I'm gonna break down stereotypes. Except you, fatty. I'm gonna bring down the curve. Oh, one more thing. I should probably mention, if your health points reach 0, your real bodies perish as well. What? Okay. If you die in the game, you die for real. What? Really? Okay. Sometimes, things are born. They live, and then they stop. Forever. What?
Oh my god! If we die in the game, we die for real!
Yeah, I'm just gonna keep that tabbed. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Last thing, I swear. I disabled the profanity filter. Have fun with that.
We're fucked!
Ballsy, I'm heading to next town, and I need your help.
Really? You need my help?
Yeah, there's a mini-boss on the way, and I need some cannon fodder. You in or out?
As tempting as that sounds, I really should stick with my friends back there. They're about as skilled as I am, so I figure we have a better chance of surviving if we stick together.
Well, monkeys and typewriters.
In any case, you may be the most unbearable asshole I've ever met, but you are really good at this game. We could use you in our group. What do you say? You can meet my friends, we'll form a guild, and have all these adventures. It'll be great! Well, screw you too! Think you're too good to join my guild? Think you're all cool because you know how to kill a boar?
Call me an asshole!
Oh, that was hilarious.
Your second episode.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's better than the actual original anime. Let's be real. Is anyone else keep getting this error message on YouTube? Because I literally keep getting this.
The following is a non-profit fan-based parody. Sword Art Online is owned by A1 Pictures, Aniplex USA, and Reki Kawahara.
Abrupt and tragic end. Some by bad luck, others by sheer stupidity. I mean, really, why would you just stand and fire? Anyways, that didn't bother the kid none. He only cared about one thing, and one thing alone, himself. 'Cause in a game of life or death, you either live, or you die.
Oh, wow. What brilliant insight. It's so deep, it loops right back around to being stupid.
The kid ranted at no one. It's slowly dawning just how alone he truly was.
Wait, what was that?
He asked the sky like a preacher to gods.
What god? About.
Or
Make it.
Hello. Sorry, my internet dropped. But Ant is on his way, so worked out. Let me see. Let me get the stream back up. Did everyone enjoy the abridged series?
Hello.
Great.
Hello, hello.
Can you guys hear me?
It's a little hard to hear you.
How about now? Is this a little better?
Yeah, that's better. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to set everything up. My internet dropped. It's not fun. So here we